Alright, hello everyone. My name is Christopher Masensky, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to set up a virtual machine. A virtual machine is sort of like a computer that runs inside of another computer. So this is going to be particularly relevant, especially if you're a Microsoft Windows user, because for this class we're really going to want to use something that's got sort of like a Linux-based system to run a lot of our code. Alright, and so in particular we need to run things like, for example, C++, variants of the Racket programming language, and a few other languages. And we're going to need some specialized commands, and we're going to need to be able to talk to the computer in a way that is going to require us to interact with the command prompt. And it's a little bit harder to interact with the command prompt on Microsoft Windows than it is in some other operating systems. There are some ways to do it, but it's just a little bit easier for me to be able to tell you what to do if you're on something like a Linux-based system. Now, if you're a student using a Macintosh OS X system, so if you've got a recent, maybe a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro, anything from the past few years that's running Mac OS X, you should also be able to use, you shouldn't need to install a virtual machine. You will be able to just follow many of the commands that I'm going to show you here. Okay, so right now I'm showing you a little bit about the submit script. This class is going to have an autograder. The autograder is going to be, it's got a particular command you're going to run, and what I'm showing right now on the screen is the source code for the autograding script that you're going to use to turn in your assignments, and also check them out. I'll sort of detail exactly how you're going to do that towards the end of this video. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to install VirtualBox, which is a particular kind of virtual machine. This virtual machine is going to allow us to install Linux on our computer. So specifically if you're on Windows, you're going to want to do that. I'm going to select OS X hosts. The host is the name of the system that actually runs the virtual machine. So I'm going to be running a Linux machine from Mac OS X. If you're on Windows, you'll click that Windows hosts button. So if you're running a Windows machine, make sure you click on that button, and you can just go to virtualbox.org/downloads. Now I've clicked that. I'm going to let that download. It'll take a few minutes. All right, meanwhile, while I do that, we're going to start downloading Linux. Now, I particularly like a version of Linux called Lubuntu. It's a very lightweight distribution that's going to be able to run inside of a virtual machine very easily without very much work. Now, you can just go to lubuntu.net/downloads, and it's going to show you a whole bunch of different versions of the operating system you can download. Now, if you're on any kind of a most recent computer, you're probably running a 64-bit machine. If you're running a 64-bit machine, you're going to click this top link that says suitable for most computers, Lubuntu desktop 64-bit. There are some other alternative images you can use, for example, if you have a 32-bit machine, but really you almost certainly have a 64-bit machine. So you just want to click on that link right down there, and it's going to start downloading Lubuntu as a .iso file. Now, a .iso file is a disk image file. It's a file that if you had a CD-ROM writer, you could take that image file and just write it directly onto a CD-ROM. All right, and then what you could do is you would be able to stick that CD into a computer, it would read it, and then when it was booting up, it would load the operating system. Now, because we are going to use a virtual machine, we're not going to actually stick it, burn it on a disk, and put it in and then boot the operating system up. We're just going to sort of stick it in a virtual slot, almost as if we had virtually inserted the disk. And so this virtual machine, this VirtualBox program, has a way to basically virtually load up a disk. And you can actually do this with any kind of operating system. It doesn't just have to be Linux. It can be whatever kind of operating system you might be running, Mac OS X, Windows, different variants of Linux, or whatever other operating system you might use. All right, so VirtualBox is now downloaded, so I'm going to click the little VirtualBox install link. That's going to pop up. All right. Let's see. All right, so clicking on that now, it's going to open it up, say it's verifying it to make sure the file's integrity is correct and all that. All right. There we go. Pretty big file, so it takes a long time to open. And here I'm just showing you that if you were on Windows, you would start clicking that. It opens up as an exe file. I'm not going to do that because I'm not on Windows. So, all right. You also can eventually get this VirtualBox extension pack. I'm not going to show that in this video. It's very useful to be able to do some extra cool stuff, make the virtual machine look a little bit nicer. If you're interested in that, please feel free to talk to me. All right, so now I'm just going to follow the instructions here. I'm going to double click on the icon. It's going to open up. I'm going to select continue, go through all the steps here. VirtualBox is pretty small, only about 300 megabytes. All right, so then I'm going to enter my Touch ID. It's going to actually install those files to my disk. Now this is not installing Linux or anything like that. It's just installing VirtualBox. And VirtualBox is the virtual machine program that's going to allow me to run another operating system inside of my Mac OS X operating system that I'm running normally. All right, so here we go. Seems like it's taken a while, but I have a pretty fast drive, so it should be done pretty soon. All right, there we go. All right, now it's going to say security extension blocked. This is because my operating system, actually Mac OS X, is going to it's going to really lock down the computer so that random programs can't just touch the internal parts of the operating system. Because this is a virtual machine, surprise, surprise, it really needs to be able to do some sort of things where it has to actually touch the internals of the computer, and Mac OS X doesn't make it easy for programs to do that, and that's why it's going to say the installation failed. So it says the installation failed. That's just because I need to go click this in the security and privacy tab of the operating system preferences. I just need to go click allow right there. All right, now it's going to say move the trash. I'm going to move that to trash so I don't have the file sitting around on disk. All right, so got that running right there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up VirtualBox after having installed it. It's going to boot up and says, welcome to VirtualBox. All right, now I'm going to select this new button right here to create a new virtual machine. I have to give it a name, so I'm going to name it CS245, although you can name it whatever you want. It's not really relevant. Just because if you have mini virtual machines, you want to disambiguate them in some way. And now it'll say that the virtual machine is going to be stored at user/kmasinski, so my home directory /virtualbox VMs. And then it says type Microsoft Windows version Windows 7. So I'm going to go ahead and select Linux. And then I'm going to select a generic Linux, let's see, 2.6 64-bit. So the 64-bit part is crucial, I believe, but it doesn't really matter what operating system I choose. It's not like, for example, that VirtualBox ships with all these operating systems. This is just telling the virtual machine what operating system to expect. All right, so it's not just that, for example, if you don't have a licensed copy of Windows, you can't just go on here and select, I want to run Windows, and it's going to boot up. It's not magic like that, but it will. It just tells VirtualBox what to expect. So now I'm actually going to pop over into expert mode, which unfortunately deselects many of my preferences, so that's kind of not very good UI on their part, but oh well. I'll re-enter my name, CS245. I'll reset back again to Linux and Linux 2.6, 3.x, but 64-bit. I'm going to give it that same name, CS245, except now I'm going to bump up the memory a little bit. So you want to give this machine, basically this virtual machine will act as if it has this much RAM. So my regular machine has 16 gigabytes of RAM. I'm going to give this machine 2 gigabytes of RAM. If you give it too much RAM, then your operating system won't have that much RAM, right? So if I pump it up to something like 12 gigabytes of RAM like I'm showing here, well then my operating system isn't going to have normal RAM to be able to just, for example, from my Mac OS X operating system to just be doing its normal functions and things like that. So I really don't want to give it too much RAM. If you only have 8 gigabytes of RAM, I would suggest you only give, for example, 1 gigabyte of RAM off to the virtual machine. All right, so make sure to save yourself a pretty generous amount of space. You really probably won't need that much RAM for the stuff that we do in this class. All right, and then down here, I'm just going to say create a virtual disk now. And this is going to create sort of an emulated hard drive that's sort of stored on my real hard drive. It's going to appear to the virtual machine as if it's just a normal hard drive, but it's going to be stored on my main computer's hard drive. All right, and then I'm going to click create. It's going to ask me how much space do I want to give it. 8 gigabytes, that's a pretty small hard drive. We're not going to really need all that much room, but remember you need to be at least able to store the operating system and then any other programs you want. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to increase that just to maybe like 10 gigabytes or so. I can even manually write 10 GB. And I'm also going to hit dynamically allocated, this little radio button right here. That's going to make it so that it doesn't take all of that 10 gigabytes at once. It's going to only use it after the space is actually used. Right, so I'll click create there. All right, so now my machine is all ready to use. Doesn't actually have an operating system on it right now, and if I try to start it up, it's just going to be like if you just took a standard hard drive, put it in a machine, what would happen? Well, nothing would happen because it doesn't have anything installed on it, so it's just going to print an error message. So the first thing when I try to start this machine is that VirtualBox is going to ask me, do you want to insert a disk as if it was in the CD drive, because that will give you the ability to install the operating system. And in fact, this message even says, this should be suitable for starting a computer from and should contain the operating system you wish to install. So I haven't fully downloaded the operating system yet, and because of that, if I try to install that, then what we're going to see is that if you could read this message up here, it would say, well, no drive selected, I don't really know what to do, and the virtual machine is just going to stop. And that's because I don't have anything installed. So here now I'm going to wait until I have the Lubuntu actually finished downloading. So now it's finished downloading. I waited a few minutes. I'm going to start it again. The same thing's going to happen, of course. I can see I don't have anything installed there, but I have that virtual disk downloaded. So that Lubuntu down in the very bottom of the screen, you can see in my downloads pane, that's all finished installing. So that's the disk that I'm going to insert. All right, so I'll exit out of this, close that virtual machine, power it off. This time, I'm going to go over to Settings. I'm going to go to Storage, and then I'm going to go right here down to Controller IDE where it says Empty. That's saying that's where you can insert a disk. All right, I'm going to click down there. I'm going to click on that little CD picture, and then I'm going to say Choose Virtual Disk File. And then I'm going to go to Downloads. I'm going to just select, it's a RAW, it's an ISO file. I'm going to go to Downloads right now. I've got Lubuntu downloaded, and then this will basically virtually insert the disk into the virtual machine. All right. If you have a Windows computer, this is going to be the same instructions, except you're just going to be using Windows. So no worries there. You're going to do the same thing. You're going to click Start. All right. Now it's going to be as if I had inserted the disk into the machine, and the Lubuntu setup is going to work. All right. I can click Scaled Mode. And this is going to be a little bit of a pain at first, so trying to make the screen a little bit bigger. What this message is saying is that basically when I move my mouse into the pane here, it's going to be acting as if I was moving the mouse on this virtual computer. That's fine for now. I'll select, let's say, just Start Lubuntu. I'm going to start it from the disk, so the operating system will be running off of the disk. But the first thing that I'm going to do when I have it installed off the disk is that I'm going to actually install the operating system for real. So for now, Linux is going to be, Linux is going to boot. We're going to be booting into Lubuntu. But after this, what's going to happen is that I'm going to have this, I'm going to be able to actually install this operating system now. All right. All right, so now we're starting up. Now, if you're on a Macintosh OS X system, you won't need to do this first step of setting up a virtual machine, okay? But you will need to do many of the subsequent steps, and I'll show you how to do some of those in a little bit. All right? Okay, so we're going to select that Install Lubuntu 18.10 thing right here. It's going to come up with this big graphic icon. I could just manually go down and adjust the screen resolution. I'm not, let's see. I'll do that eventually. I guess I didn't figure that out when I was going through this screencast the first time. All right. So there we go. I'll just maximize the screen. That'll give me all the buttons. I'll click Next. I'm in America, New York. That's fine. Select through that. Go Next. I'm just going to click erase the entire disk. That's going to just reserve the entire virtual disk for Linux. That's fine. Got a 10 gigabyte disk there. Now remember, this isn't your actual hard disk, it's just your virtual hard disk. Now I have to select a computer name, so I'm just entering Christopher Masinski. I'll enter Chris as my account name, and then I'm going to name the computer Chris as well. Then I'm going to enter a small password. You know, you probably don't want a short password like this. You probably want to make your password, you know, somewhat secure. So having a 4-character password will work. Might not be so bad. Not as bad as if this were your real computer because it's just a virtual machine, but sort of always good to have better passwords when we can. So I'm going to type in here a better password. Type that in again. All right. Then I'm click install. And now we're going to be ready for the install phase. We should be good. All right, click install now. And it's all going to install. All right. So now it's just going to show us a whole bunch of different features from Lubuntu. Really, on this time, you'll just have to do some waiting. It takes a while to install all this software. Lubuntu is basically the core parts of Linux, which is the operating system's kernel. The kernel is the thing that does the things under the hood, like manage access to files, you know, schedule out what programs get to run on the CPU, how often, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to cut this short and just fade back. All right, so now that we've got Linux installed, I'm going to go here. I'm going to adjust some of the configuration options with it. So I'm first going to open a terminal. All right, and this is how we're going to interact with it. I'm going to open up this program Git. Git is a source code management system. All right, so ls is the command that we can use to open up a project. I'm going to create a new directory named projects using the makedir command, and then I'm going to clone into it, and then I'm going to get this URL right here. This URL is https, and then it's github.com. So I'm going to do git clone, which is going to fetch a remote repository, and then exactly this stuff right here, https github.com/kmasinski/submit.git, and that's going to check out that code. Now I'm going to cd into it. I'm going to cat readme.md, and these are the instructions. And it's going to say that for a new project, every time I want to create a new project, so every time I want to solve a new project in the class, I create a folder with that name. I copy submit.py into it. All right, so first I have to create a directory named, and then it has to be the name of the assignment. So for example, if I'm working on Lab 0, the folder name has to be Lab 0. It can't be anything except for Lab 0. All right. I can even run Python now. I can see that I've got Python 3 here running. I can see, for example, I would run Python 3 and then projects, submit.py, and it's going to tell me, well, I can't run submit.py. I need a program named, I need the Python module, PyInquirer. Turns out I also need Colorama, requests, and pretty table. So I need to run this command. And it turns out the first time I did this, it didn't work because I didn't have pip installed. Pip is a Python package manager. It's going to allow me to install Python packages. So I'm going to do a sudo apt install python 3/pip. And then I got my password wrong a whole bunch of times here because I forgot what it was. So that's just me being silly. Let's see. All right, so now so I'm still trying to install PyInquirer, Colorama, request, and pretty table. Those are just the Python modules that submit.py needs to work. What I'm going to do, there we go. This is just installing pip for Python, which is going to allow me to get those packages. I'm installing it using apt. Apt is a package management system for Ubuntu, which is, Lubuntu is based on Ubuntu. All right, so Ubuntu is a very popular Linux distribution. It's a variant of Linux that packages a whole bunch of common niceties that you'll use for various things. And apt is the way that you interact with it. So if you want to install a package, you use, for example, apt install. All right. So we're installing Python's pip right now. There we go. All right, so now I need to go back. One thing you can do is if you typed a previous command, don't type it again, just push the up button. All right, so when you're interacting with the shell, you don't need to laboriously type out commands. If you want to run the same command again, just push the up button. This is a mistake or not a mistake, but this is just something I see students doing a lot of, and they can save a whole bunch of time if they're interacting with the terminal a bunch that we'll be doing in this class. By just pushing the up button, that'll get you your old command. And then usually, I do this a whole bunch when I'm writing software because I'm frequently rerunning the same command. All right, now I'm going to copy submit.py into this directory, like the instructions say. I'm going to run submit.py, and it's saying, this directory is empty, would you like to start a new project? Now I'm going to enter my username, which is ktest, and then my password, and then it's going to tell me all the different possible projects I can have. I'm going to download the Lab 0 project, and it's going to tell me, project is due at midnight on 1/24/2019. Project is on time. You have 6 days left. All right, so I have a bunch of options I can select from here. I can run the test locally. So all the projects in this class are going to have a set of tests. That's what I'm going to use to be able to tell whether the project is installed. I just ran them and I was able to see all the tests failed. That's because I haven't actually implemented my code yet, but it's also because of another problem. It's because I haven't actually installed the right compiler yet either. All right, so let's go see what test.py looks like. All right, so I'm going to select reverse.cpp. Reverse.cpp is the actual piece of the actual code file that I'm going to be editing to complete my project. Now I want to start editing. I'm going to use a program called Emacs. I really like Emacs. It's a nice little code editor. I've used it for a long time, although other popular options include VI or Vim. You should look into both of them and maybe play around with both of them. If you want to install Vim on your little virtual machine, instead of typing sudo apt install Emacs 25, you just install sudo apt install Vim, and then that would be sort of loaded up. Now I can see right here, the reason the project isn't working is because it says to do. Write a loop that reverses all the numbers in the buffer. Remember, the variable end represents the number of numbers stored in the array buffer. All right. So now I'm just going to write a little loop that sort of does something to manipulate the buffer, but it doesn't actually do the right thing. And that's because I don't want to give away all the answer in this video, and that's something that you have to puzzle through. But I want to get you sort of off the ground. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a little loop that goes through and just moves everything in the array up 1. So I'm going to say, for example, start x to be equal to 1, x is less than n minus 1, x plus plus, and then I'm going to say the buffer at value x minus 1 is going to be set equal to whatever the buffer is at x. All right, now I'm going to run python 3 test.py. Now you can run submit.py to get all the tests, or to run the tests, but you can also run test.py, and that'll let you run all the local tests. There will also be secret tests. All right, so we can see we can run this command test.py and then all. And here it'll say that all of our tests failed. And the reason our test failed is because we haven't installed Clang++. All right, now here I tried to install Clang++, didn't work. So it turns out that the thing I actually need is Clang. All right, so I've got Clang installed now. I'm going to do sudo apt install Clang. That'll bring up everything. That'll give me Clang++. Now I can rerun the tests again. I'm just going to run them all. Most of them are going to fail, but one of them will pass. And that's just because of sheer luck. One of the tests are not, the tests are written to catch most of the errors, but obviously even broken programs will pass some tests. So I can see what happens by hand if I just type in Clang++ reverse.cpp. It'll produce a file named a.out. And I run that file by putting a ./ and then the program's name. the default behavior of the compiler is to produce a file named a.out, and that's for very historical reasons. We can run the program, or we can actually make the program go to somewhere else by appending the -o option. And so in the second example there, I did clang++, then the file name, and then I was able to hit -o and then reverse. And then I was able to run it by typing in // and then reverse. Now here I'm showing an example of how I submit my projects. So now it's going to say assignment submitted, check back in 5 to 10 minutes, and I can see now I've got this project pending. Now I do have another submission that says graded 100%, and that's because I had previously submitted it before to test to make sure that the assignment was all working. So that's not what I did just now. That was a previous assignment that I had already completed. All right? So this is basically how you use the submit server. This was an introduction to how to set up a virtual machine. If you want to do most of these steps, if you want to set up a virtual machine, this is basically how you do it. But for Mac OS X, it's very similar.